Greetings folks, Iolair here. In this video I'm going to review the destroyer skills of the proposed overhaul of the commander skill system in World of Warships. Now, Wargaming announced these changes on the development blog this past Tuesday, September 1st. I did prepare a video that went over this article that you're viewing on your screen right now. It provides an overview, the general structure, approach, motivation, etc. of these changes, and I'm going to make assumptions that you understand the material in the article, either having watched my video or read the article directly. For example, things like the maximum number of skill points on commanders is being increased from 19 to 21. The skill sets or skill trees are being broken out by class, etc., etc. So, as I did with the review of the cruiser skills yesterday, I'm going to break down my analysis based on skills that are more or less remaining the same, skills that are being added new or are changing, and then lastly, skills that are being dropped. And then I'll have some discussion about potential destroyer builds based on the current structure, or at least the proposed structure. Now, that's a good reminder that all of this is subject to change. In fact, even in the spreadsheet, which I've just switched to, that Wargaming provided and is linked from the article I was just showing, this goes over a list of all of the proposed skills. This spreadsheet has already seen some changes or tweaks over the last few days. Nothing really big structurally, but definitely some adjustments here and there. So all of this is subject to change. This is a really, really big change. So almost anything that I say here could end up being moot at the end of the day, but I think the general structure and approach will by and large remain intact. So I'm going to switch over to a spreadsheet that I prepared that breaks things down based on how I described, and I'll do a walkthrough here. So first I'm going to start with Gunner, and this is today we call Expert Marksman. It's moving from a level 2 to a level 1 skill, and it improves turret rotation on your main guns. Now, how this is being calculated under the new system is it will improve turret speed by 20%. Under the old system with Expert Marksman, for shell calibers of 139 millimeters and smaller, which represents the vast majority of destroyers, the turret's speed improved by 2.5 degrees per second. And then larger caliber guns that we mostly see on cruisers and battleships, the improvement was 0.7 degrees per second. Now, for the smaller caliber guns that represent 95+% of destroyers, the way that this is being calculated, if I understand it correctly, will actually by and large be a nerf compared to the current Expert Marksman. So let me give you an example. So let's say, for example, you have a destroyer with caliber 139 millimeters or smaller, and it traverses 180 degrees in 18 seconds, so 10 degrees per second. Under the current Expert Marksman method, Wargaming will add 2.5 degrees per second, making the turret traverse 12.5 degrees per second. Under this new proposal, if I'm calculating this correctly, or if I'm doing it the way that Wargaming intends, the traverse of 10 seconds, 10 degrees per second, so covering 180 degrees in 18 seconds, that would be an increase by 20% to 12 degrees per second, which is slower than the 12.5. So if I'm calculating this correctly and I'm approaching this the way that Wargaming intended, the break-even point for where the turret traverse would actually be faster by picking up Expert Marksman over picking up Gunner over Expert Marksman would be 14.4 seconds for 180 degrees. And by and large, destroyers that have turrets that fast, most players don't pick up Expert Marksman. So either I'm approaching the calculation incorrectly, and I need to see an example, or we need to see an example that Wargaming can provide that will explain how this will be done, or Wargaming may have to make some adjustments, or maybe it wasn't Wargaming's intention that the new Gunner skill will not be as beneficial to destroyers as it is today. So we'll have to see. The next skill is Loader, and that is today called Expert Loader. The function remains the same. The level is the same. The next skill is Maintenance Specialist. Let me click on these, make sure these are highlighted. And that's the same as preventative maintenance today, provides the same function, just been renamed. It's still a level 1 skill. The next skill is Argus Eyed. We've seen this on battleships and destroyer cruisers as well. This is priority target, and it's moving from a level 1 skill to a level 2 skill. So it performs the same function, but it's just becoming more expensive. The next skill is Propulsive, and this is Last Stand. It performs the same function, and it is at the same level. Now, I do want to make one observation. I'm going to jump back over to the spreadsheet that Wargaming provided, because there's an interesting topic that they've added to the spreadsheet. So one thing that they wanted to mention was the mechanics of critical damage, and I'm looking at, so I'm going to try to highlight the cell here for you, just make it clear. So the mechanics of critical damage to the engine were changed, or are being changed under the proposal. Now, when dealing critical damage to the engine, its power doesn't go down to 0, meaning that if your engine gets knocked out, you aren't going to be just completely dead in the water. But it descends to a particular value. There's nothing in the article that says what that particular value is, however. This will increase the survivability of destroyers without the propulsive skill, which is what I just mentioned here a moment ago. Steering gears can still be incapacitated, and therefore your engine could still be moving at a reduced rate, but your steering is still knocked out without the propulsive skill. Due to this, the propulsive skill still works the following way. When dealing critical damage to the engine, its power reduces slightly less than without the skill. So basically, if you take propulsive and your engine gets knocked out, you will move faster than if you didn't have the propulsive skill. But they aren't articulating what exactly the differential is. So we'll have to see what that is once they finalize the details. All right, so that's propulsive. The next skill is Main Battery and AA Specialist, which performs the function of BFT with a slight change. So its current level is 3. I said 2 here. It's wrong. It's 3. Okay, so I stand corrected. So BFT is at the level 3 skill. This new skill is level 3 as well. It will increase continuous AA damage by 10%, but it won't be quite as strong with the main battery reload. So BFT today improves main battery reload by 10% for the smaller caliber shells, meaning 139 degrees and smaller. But this one will improve it by only 5%. But however, there's no mention in the spreadsheet from Wargaming that there's any restriction on shell size. So the larger caliber destroyer guns like the Z-23 and the Ernst Geda, etc., it looks like they would benefit from this skill. The next skill is Torpedo Armament Expert. This performs the same function. It's the same level. It improves your torpedo reload by 10%. Adrenaline Rush is the same in terms of its function, but it's moving from a level 2 skill to a level 3 skill. Threshing is IFHE, and it's moving from a level 4 skill to a level 3 skill. So this has been kind of interesting because for battleships, threshing has been moved from a level 4 to level 2, and for cruisers, threshing or IFHE has remained a level 4 skill, whereas for destroyers, they're moving it from a level 4 to a level 3. Now, IFHE is taken today on a select number of destroyers. The Japanese gunboat destroyers like the Akizuki, Kitakami, and the Haragumo, I believe most players take it so that they can get the penetration on the 32 millimeter surfaces of battleships. I have historically taken IFHE on my gunboat destroyers for the Russians, so that I can fight upper tier cruisers and get past the 27 millimeter penetration. But it's still a matter of some significant controversy for everything pretty much other than the Japanese gunboat destroyers. So, but the bottom line is it's going to remain in the tree or in the skill tree, and it's one tier low or one level lower. The next skill is Provident, and it's identical to Superintendent, and function is simply being renamed, and it's at the same level. As is the same next skill, which is called Enduring, and is today called Survivability Expert. It increases your health pool by 350 hit points per tier. Again, it remains a level 3 skill. The next skill is Main Battery and AA Expert, which is performs the function of AFT today. It increases main battery range by 20%. And again, there's no mention in here of being restricted by shell caliber or shell size. And it increases the damage from AA shell explosions, meaning flak, in those long-range AA bubbles by 15%. So that's the same thing as what AFT does today. So this skill remains essentially intact. The next two skills are also the same, just one rename. So intelligence radio technician is what we call radio location today. Same function. It's a level 4 skill. And then concealment expert is the same. It's a level 4 skill and it performs the same function. So one of the things that I found was that the destroyers actually had more skills preserved than the other two classes that I've reviewed so far. All right. Now we get to new and changed skill. So the first new skill is Torpedo Man. This is a level 1 skill. It will increase the chance of flooding on torpedoes by 30%. I think this will probably be very popular with torpedo-centric destroyer builds. Next skill is Consumable Specialist. Excuse me. Consumable Specialist. It's a level 1 skill. It's roughly the equivalent of Jack of all trades, which is a level 2 skill. It will reduce the cooldown on a select number of consumables by 10%. So Jack of all trades improves the reload by 5%. This one will improve it by 10%, but only for a select number of consumables. So main battery reload booster, torpedo reload booster, spotting aircraft and fighter, which don't apply to destroyers, and then defensive AA fire. The next skill is AA Gunner. This is a new level 1 skill. It increases the number of explosions in the long-range flak clouds by 1. Now, this skill is also present on battleships and cruisers, where I kind of questioned the value of this skill. Now, for AA-centric destroyer skills, this might be more valuable because the number of explosions that they have in their long-range AA tends to be smaller, and therefore increasing by 1 represents a larger ratio of benefit. So it might be suitable for an AA-centric build on a destroyer. Next skill is Pyrotechnist. This is a level 2 skill. It's basically a nerfed version of Demolition Expert, which is a level 3 skill. It increases the chance of fire from main and secondary battery shells by 1%. The next skill is AP Demolition Expert, and I think this is going to be very popular for a lot of gunboat or even just regular destroyer builds. It's a level 2 skill, and it will increase AP shell damage by 5%. Now, we saw a similar skill by the same name, which was a level 3 skill for cruisers, and it increased damage by 7%, but it was only applicable for shell sizes greater than 190 degrees. However, this skill for destroyers appears to have no limitation on the shell size. So where I think this would be very popular is on destroyers that have very strong AP. So I'm thinking, obviously, the Germans, the Royal Navy destroyers, which have preferred pen angles on their AP, as well as the French destroyers, and probably the Russians as well, because when you do have the chance to fire AP, it can be very effective when you get it into those softer areas of your targets. And so I think for gunboat builds, and like I said, for some other nations, this will be a very appealing skill to take. Next skill is Torpedo Armament Specialist. This is the same as torpedo acceleration, with the difference that it does not reduce range. So it increases the torpedo speed. I suppose I could have put this under the preserved section as well, but like I said, it improves the speed of your torpedoes, but unlike the current skill today, it does not reduce the range. Next skill is Consumables Expert. This is a level 2 skill. It's new, and it will increase the action time of hydro, radar, smoke, meaning the deployment, I expect, meaning how long of a line of smoke you can lay down, not how long the smoke sticks around, as well as engine boost. So again, I think that this would be a very popular skill on destroyers that have some or all of these consumables. So German, some of the radar destroyers, maybe a number of smoke-centric destroyers, certainly destroyers that have engine boost, French, Russian, etc. This will likely be a very popular skill. Now, the next skill is not part, and I want to stress not part of the destroyer tree, but I wanted to include it for comparison. So this Torpedo Man Demolition Expert skill is in the current proposed cruiser skill tree. And what it does is it increases maximum torpedo damage by 15%. Now, for some reason, Wargaming has elected to not include it as a candidate in the destroyer skill tree. So draw your own hypothesis why that might be. But, clearly for torpedo-centric builds on a destroyer, this would be very appealing, and it seems kind of odd that you would have this for a cruiser build, because there are only a select number of cruisers that might want to build into that. But, I just wanted to include it here for comparison reasons. Now we get to three new level 4 skills that are very interesting, and I think Wargaming purposefully designed to really apply some significant specialization and capability to destroyers. So the first skill is called Cautious, and what it does is it will be a nerf to your main battery reload by 10%, but the benefit is that when your ship is undetected, your ship speed is increased by 8%, which, other than for most French destroyers, is the speed boost you get from the engine boost consumable. So what this would mean is that for a destroyer that has this skill, they would effectively have engine boost turned on all the time in some sense when their ship was undetected. But the trade-off here is that they give up reload speed on their main battery guns. Now, my opinion on this is I think for regular random battles, I don't know how compelling of an argument, how compelling of a skill this is. I guess it depends upon how you play. For me, when I play destroyer, I see that a key part of my role is to fight other destroyers, and the main way that I do that is with my guns. And I wouldn't want to compromise my gun reload, regardless of nation, just potentially to get this extra speed. Or at least that's kind of my current thinking. I could definitely see this skill being useful in a competitive situation where destroyers typically remain undetected and they aren't gunboating by and large, other than, true gunboats. But concealment destroyers in competitive settings, this could be a very useful skill. The next skill is Fearless, and this is clearly aimed at gunboat destroyers, especially the French and the Russians, where they're going 45, 50 plus knots, and they basically don't care that they're detected, and they're just shooting their guns all the time. So it increases the ship's concealment by 5%, but it reduces the reload of the main battery by 10% when the ship is detected. So it's clear that Wargaming wants the skill to be aimed at destroyers that are in the open and visible. You don't get the reload buff like when you're sitting in smoke or camped behind an island and remain undetected. And like I said, the quote nerf is an increase in detection by 5%. But if this is aimed at destroyers like the upper tier French, the Russian gunboat destroyers, they basically, by and large, don't care that they're detected, or often don't care. And so giving up the concealment, they're like, whatever. I mean, if I'm getting, a 10% buff on my gun reload, yes, please, I'll happily take that. So I think this Fearless skill is going to be very useful for those types of builds. And then lastly is Nimble. And this one I think is going to be very popular especially for concealment destroyers. So what this does is that within the first 15 seconds of your ship being detected, the dispersion of shells by enemies fired up on your ship will increase by 20%. So for concealment destroyers, in those situations where they maybe get detected either by accident or by radar or whatever, and they're basically get into flight mode to try to get out of there, for the first 15 seconds while they're detected, the dispersion of shells being fired at them is significantly increased, and therefore, at least numerically, they'll have fewer shells hitting them or potentially hitting them. Now, based on how this has been described by Wargaming, the reset occurs as soon as the ship goes back off detection. So as soon as the ship that has this skill goes back off detection, that 15-second interval is reset. So this one, I think for sure, is probably going to be part of most or many concealment destroyer builds for high high skill captains. All right, so now let me get to dropped skills. So the first one is incoming fire alert. I think this could be a potential issue for gunboat destroyers where they don't care so much about how many are targeting them through priority target, but they want to know when the shells are coming in so that they can make a choice about how they dodge. So this skill under the current proposal is being dropped. High alert is getting dropped. This is probably not too big of a deal. This reduces the cooldown on the damage control. It's more aimed at battleships, so I expect destroyers are probably going to be less concerned here. Jack of all trades, excuse me, at least in its pure form, is going away. So there is the consumables specialist, where is it here, that improve or reduces the reload on a number of consumables, but it doesn't apply to things like damage control, repair party, hydro, or radar. And therefore, and I do suspect that there are probably some destroyer builds that like to have Jack of all trades, and that's now going to get dropped. The next skill, which probably is going to be a big deal for some players, is Smokescreen Expert is going away as well. And this was also dropped for cruisers. So I do know a number of destroyer and cruiser players that like playing with Smokescreen Expert. There's obviously there's buffed skills from some unique commanders that have this. There's no one thing I should state here is there's no discussion in the update from Wargaming about what's going to happen with the unique commanders and their skill sets. That's going to come out at a later date. But bottom line is this skill is going away. Next skill is Basics of Survivability. This one reduces floods and fire duration. Again, probably not a big deal for destroyers. Vigilance is going away for destroyers, and that potentially could be an issue because some destroyer players like having vigilance to improve the chance of being able to get detecting torpedoes earlier, getting out of their way, and giving them more advanced warning that they can get out of the way. Manual secondaries, or manual fire control for secondary armament, is going away. Other than meme builds for A-hull, umakazes, this is probably not an issue at all. Fire prevention, again, reduces the number of fires on a ship and reduces the chance of going on fire. Again, not really taken by most destroyer players, so I don't see that as a big issue. And then lastly, massive AA fire is just being dropped across the board, all classes. I think few people are going to be upset about this. This was kind of a dud skill to begin with, was a very poor replacement for the manual AA skill that we used to have. So that's a breakdown of the skills. Let me go now to the builds. Since I am a little further over than I wanted to, let me try to get through these fairly quickly. So core skills that I can see here would be maintenance specialist, which is preventative maintenance, consumables specialist, and consumables expert will likely be quite popular on some destroyer builds. Argus Eyed, which is priority target. Some players take, some others don't. Some assume that if they're detected, everybody's shooting at them anyway. They don't need to know how many are targeting them. So this one is probably not too controversial, or may or may not be taken too often. Propulsive, which is last stand, I think will be quite common on the vast majority of destroyer builds, as is enduring, which is currently called survivability expert. Adrenaline rush, I've said this multiple times in other videos. It should be part of all surface combat ship builds at some point during the development of the commander. And then lastly, concealment expert, although for some gunboat builds like my Soviet or Russian gunboats, I don't care about concealment by and large, because I'm going to be staying at range firing my guns all the time anyway, so I don't care. But for 80%, 75%, 80% of destroyers, this will be probably the first level 4 skill to take. For stealth destroyers, I mentioned Nimble. This is the one that increases dispersion of shells fired upon you within the first 15 seconds after being detected. I think this will probably be very common on stealth destroyer builds. Cautious, again, feels very specialized. This is the one that increases your main battery reload, but you get a speed boost while your ship remains undetected. I think this is probably going to be more suitable for competitive modes. Torpedo-centric builds will probably take advantage of Torpedo Man, which increases flooding chance. Torpedo Armament Specialist, which increases torpedo speed. and Torpedo Armament Expert, which reduces torpedo reload. So again, torpedo-centric builds will probably take advantage of one or multiple of these. Gunboats, so again, I'm thinking French, Russian, Japanese, etc. Pyrotechnist, which is Demolition Expert, will probably be fairly common. AP Demolition Expert, I think, will be quite common for a lot of gunboats, and even some non-gunboats. Like I said, the Germans and the Royal Navy destroyers, even if they're not in full gunboat builds, would likely benefit from AP Demolition. Threshing is going to be highly specialized, and again, I won't get into the discussion here about whether it's worth taking or not. And then Fearless seems very compelling for gunboat builds. Yes, I don't care about being, having an increased detection radius. I want faster reload on my guns. I think this one is going to be very common. And then lastly, AA builds, some combination of these three, AA Gunner, and then the AA Specialist and Expert for AA-centric builds, like for your Kids or your Fletchers, and especially I think the U.S. Navy destroyers would likely benefit. All right, so that is going to cover it. Again, I went quite a bit for a little bit, well, not quite a bit, but a little bit longer than I wanted to, but some really interesting things that have come out of the destroyer skills. So I hope you found the information here interesting and useful. As always, leave your comments, questions, and thoughts in the comments below. And as always, we hope to see you out there on the virtual seas, and we wish you happy sailing.